Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes, Episode 17, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Issue 4, Part 2. I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Peter Rios.
We're back. It hasn't been such a long time since, certainly not as long since between episodes 15 and 16, but we're back again.
Yep.
Finish what we started, continue talking about the second half of the fourth issue of this epical, groundbreaking 12-issue maxi, I'm going to say it, Peter, maxi series.
Oh, no.
Crisis on Infinite Earths.
It's right there on the cover. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
I know you've always hated the term, but it...
Yeah. Only when they use it for like 4 issues, and they call that a maxi series.
Yeah, that's dumb.
That's not a maxi. It's a mini series.
Yeah.
This is a maxi series.
Right. It takes a year of your time to read, then yeah.
Right. I'm also not a fan of Marvel's limited series. It sounds very limiting, and I'm like, what, limited? What's so limited about it? It's, maxi series sounds great. I like that.
Limited series for limited readers.
Yeah. Because I think there even was a mini series that was called a micro series because it was only like two issues or something like that. Yeah, which further compounds the whole, label thing, which I love. Micro, mini, and maxi. I'm good.
We just want there to be scales of everything,
yeah.
don't we? Whole lists of terms to know and tell.
Yeah. So in our time, because we're Time Lords, it's actually only been 30 minutes since the last episode, or not even, like 15, 20 minutes. We're just going to pull the curtain back and let you know that we are recording this episode immediately on the heels of the previous episode because we're here in the studio. We both have the time.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, going forward into the Christmas season, it's going to be rarer for both of us.
Right. And this way we can get 2 episodes out in a month and a half's time or in 2 months' time or whatever. And then that way it's not so much of a wait for the next time whenever Adam and I can get together and then continue the process. And we'll talk about that at the end of this episode. So I have some plans or some ideas I'm going to throw Adam's way, which I think we've already talked about, but we'll do that. We'll tease at the end of the episode.
Okay, and at that point we'll find out whether I know what he's talking about or not.
Stay tuned.
Drama.
So that's why we're not going to do any feedback. We're going to jump right in.
Yep. Any information or awareness of the world that we may have is probably several weeks old by your standards listening in. Okay, so yeah, we're jumping right back into the midway point, where the staples are in issue number 4. We had just finished up with the merging of all the different shadow demons at all the different monitor vibratory towers throughout time, space, and vibratory planes of reality. They've all formed themselves into giant monster shadow demons as kind of a desperation play, last-ditch effort to keep the heroes that are trying to defend the towers away from said towers so that the giant shadow demons can smash them. And then we pick up the action on page 15, facing the page where all the things I just described happened, where we rejoin some characters in the most main of mainstream DC reality, present-day Earth 1. And it's a special team-up of the New Teen Titans and the Outsiders, plus Superman thrown in for good measure. And so we've got them this is a peculiar development because suddenly, I guess the Monitor's towers are, as they're drawing the universes together and affecting their harmonics, those towers are suddenly becoming visible in all time periods simultaneously, because here we are in 1985, and the tower suddenly appears before the massed Titans and Outsiders. They've been just trying to save people from the effects of the antimatter wave, and suddenly they've got this new wrinkle. This giant tuning fork shows up in the middle of the city, and few of the heroes rush to try to destroy it, mistaking it for a part of the threat that they're fighting. And who should appear right there before them, in full costume for the first time on page 15? Dr. Kimio Hoshi, introduced earlier in this issue, as discussed in our last episode. She is now fully costumed as the new Dr. Light, even calls herself, albeit in Japanese, the new Dr. Light. as she, realizing that she's, being only a Japanese speaker, can't communicate in English, cannot make herself understood to most of the heroes present. A couple of them attack. There's a couple of the more impetuous and less worldly heroes among them all. Halo of the Outsiders and Starfire of the Titans try to attack the tower, and Dr. Light is forced to flex her muscles, use her new light manipulation powers bestowed on her by the machinations of the Monitor to blast them aside. And the two of them kind of tumble helplessly but also harmlessly to Earth. Wonder Girl rescues Starfire, and Changeling rescues Halo, and then Superman rushes in for a parley, and the two of them are able to reach an understanding, since Superman is Superman and knows all the Earth's languages. And once he understands a little better the threat they're facing, thanks to what Dr. Light tells him, Superman then resolves to sacrifice his own life, if need be, his words, to put an end to this threat. So there's our little scene in the present day of Earth 1 in what I believe is New York City.
And I think we mentioned when one of those towers was in Atlantis, what happens to the area of space, the surface area that it encompasses? If it's in the middle of New York City,
does it destroy a building to get there?
Yeah, is it ethereal? Is it what's going?
It could be vibrating out of sync with whatever occupies its space.
Oh.
So it's kind of not so much on top of or displacing, it's just kind of out around it and also within it.
I take that. I like that.
5 points for Gryffindor.
So when Adam and I were comparing our notes, I apparently have a few more than he does. So do you want to hit if you have any for these first, and then we'll go to mine?
Well, the big question for me in this scene, and I think it's something that we kind of brushed up against in our last episode with regard to Dr. Hoshi / Dr. Light. I think you raised the question, actually. Earlier this issue, she was just her plain old, unpleasant Japanese astronomer self, watching as this burst of ionic energy from the star Vega comes in to slam into her and then make her disappear. And the next thing we know, here she is in New York, or I think it's New York. It could be Metropolis or Gotham, I guess, but I'm guessing it's New York.
New York, yeah, because the Empire State Building was being destroyed in the previous issues.
All right. I was trying to find that just a minute ago. But so she shows up there, and she's already somehow, you wondered aloud how she arrived at the decision to assume the identity of a character who had been a villain up to now. So naturally, the heroes she's trying to communicate with are going to be predisposed to distrust her because she's wearing the costume, the mantle of a well-known DC Universe ne'er-do-well, albeit a very unsuccessful one. So why? Where does she come up with this costume and name? I mean, we know the Monitor has said a couple of times he needs to create the new Dr. Light. So why does he decide that it needs to be a new Dr. Light? And how does she end up in possession of the costume and the powers? And out of nowhere, she's just got the name, the costume, and the reoriented sense of purpose. And I'm just wondering what happened exactly between when she disappeared earlier this issue and when she shows up here. And I mentioned in the last episode that we're thinking about the H dial and how. What was that in reference to anyway? Was it Pariah?
Pariah, yeah. He has all these different powers that seem to come up whenever he needs them.
Right.
Dial P for Pariah, yeah.
Yeah. And Wolfman, he in the 80s, I think it was in the Adventure Comics run of Dial H, when we introduced Chris King and company. Wolfman wrote and or edited a number of those stories. So maybe he's a little too close to the H-Dial school of character introduction, because suddenly she pops up. She's in the costume. She knows her name, and she knows what she's got to do. But we don't know how, and she might not even know how.
I mean, is some of it? Can we assume that because the Monitor satellite can exist in different points in time, or can travel to different points in time, is there something to say like maybe there's a way to slow time down in the tower, or or in the satellite? Because the father speculates that she disappears. So I guess in my mind, I always just took it as Monitor took her under his wing, and not only is that he's creating her, but is also going to quick update her on what's going on.
And give her superpowers.
Give her superpowers, give her a costume, give her information, because she has information that she wouldn't be able to glean unless someone told her about it. So I think that's...
And I'm sure the Monitor is behind the great majority of the question marks I have here, but it's just... talking of, as we were in the last episode, untold tales of crisis, this is a little scene between the scenes that I would like to see played out. It never will be, of course, but I would like to know exactly what the Monitor does or says to her.
Especially because it has to happen quickly. We were only there 3 pages ago or whatever it was. Yeah, like 3-4 pages ago. That's pretty quick to transform someone, costume them, tell them what to do, tell them what's happening, and then tell them what to do. That's quick. I mean, from the time where she's being created to now, it's probably not that much time, and yet it has to be enough time for all that to happen. So that's a curious little transition. You almost wonder maybe if this scene should have happened later, but there was no way to make that happen.
Or if the scene with Dr. Hoshi earlier this issue might have needed to happen earlier, in an earlier issue.
Well, like you said, when Monitor said I needed to go create the new Dr. Light, and then he doesn't for two issues, it's like, well, what are you waiting for?
Yeah. And I have my own little sort of a retcon type fan theory for why Dr. Light. Okay. One of our posters brought up Earth 8. It was on the talkback thread for episode 15. This is a Jeff Johns invention. It's something that he brought up in Infinite Crisis, where apparently all those new legacy bearer heroes like Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern, Helena Bertinelli as Huntress, etc. Even Breach, like the Bob Harris created Breach, was supposed to be like a new take on Captain Atom, was supposed to be like the Captain Atom of Earth 8. Like all these characters that were like 90s or later standard bearers or inheritors of hero mantles were apparently the characters who would have been the first to bear those mantles on Earth 8, a parallel Earth that was destroyed pretty early on, so before the beginning of Crisis number 1. So perhaps on Earth 8 or maybe even on Earth D, as we mentioned in the last episode, that from the Legends of the DCU Crisis special, perhaps the Kimio Hoshi of those Earths wielded the powers of Dr. Light heroically, and maybe the Monitor observed that version of Dr. Hoshi on one of those Earths and decided, okay, that's a power set that could save us. I must bring that origin into being on this Earth, even though there's already another person using the name Dr. Light and using it badly.
I like that theory.
And of course, there's absolutely no way that any of that was in Wolfman's mind, because Earth 8 was not a thing in 1985. But retroactively, it serves.
Yeah, and plus, and something that was definitely in his mind is this idea of if I'm going to create new characters, they're going to be diverse. And she's a female, she's Asian, Lady Quark, female. Not to jump the timeline a little bit, but think of the new Wildcat.
Of course, yeah.
It's that kind of these characters speak a little bit to that goal.
Right. That was definitely one of Wolfman's agendas. Maybe a little less that of DC, but definitely that was Wolfman's vision.
Right.
And that was Earth D was kind of. I think he said in interviews at the time in the late '90s that was kind of his way of working into the Crisis narrative. Albeit over a decade after effect, a vision of what he thought the new revised DC universe should have been more like. And so extra textually, I'm thinking he probably thought Dr. Light, the name was better suited for a hero, and he probably thought the costume would have looked better on a woman all along. So since Dr. Light was using it as a total failure as a villain, I figured maybe give the identity, if not the person occupying it, a new lease on life here in the throes of crisis.
Mm-hmm. What about the familiarity of it? What does that mean for the heroes? I mean, they recognize that character as a villain, and they certainly make mention here of that. But is that an easier way for them to accept her because she is someone that is taking the mantle? Is the DC universe used to that at this point? I mean, yeah, I gught to some degree they're used to.
It's happened a few times before.
Yeah, it's not as prevalent as it will be in the 90s, that's for sure.
Right. Oh.
Yeah, but Yeah, I mean, I guess that sort of answers itself in the pages. So, and we definitely get with her. What I just wrote in my notes. So we have the Great 15 that we talked about. You know, the 15 characters that the Monitor initially sets out, and then I wrote here: are we getting a Crisis 7? So we have Pariah, Harbinger, Monitor, Alexander Luthor, Lady Quark. 6 if you count the Anti-Monitor, and then with this new Dr. Light, 7. 7 characters that are essentially new characters that are vital and that will play out more or less to the end of the 12 issues. And because I can't think of Pariah was somebody, not Pariah, Psycho Pirate is a holdover, but the 7 that were created here, we sort of follow their stories from this point on. So I think that's kind of cool. I also wrote Superboy Prime, but again, he was created outside of the narrative. And he's not necessarily as, I don't want to say important, but he's not on the level of like an Alexander Luthor is to the story, or Pariah, or Dr. Light, or Lady Quark. Yeah.
Like he was created with an eye to Crisis, even though he first appeared outside of it. But yeah, he was really not much more than a nod and a wink to the reader. Like this is what could have, it's a hint as what could have happened to our quote unquote, real flesh and blood people's presence in the DC multiverse. It's our Earth could have been another DC parallel Earth if only we had a little more time.
The tower is right in front of the DC building. If you notice a little DC bullet there at the bottom of page 15, panel 3.
A little Sony billboard under it.
Yeah, and if you want to get some geography, so as I mentioned, we were at the Empire State Building in a previous issue, but that's around 34th Street. But the DC building at this time was around 52nd and 5th. So the story has moved uptown a little bit in terms of where we are. In New York, because DC at this time was 666 Fifth Avenue, as you can see in the little indicia.
Easy address to remember.
Yeah. There's something interesting about Starfire not being able to absorb her powers, as she mentions on the next page, especially considering her Dr. Light's powers come from Vega.
Right.
Which is where Starfire's from.
So there isn't even any Kryptonian-style incompatibility going on there.
Yeah.
It's her native sun.
Yeah. And Starfire gains her powers through experimentation. So, and that's something that's an origin point that I'm not sure if they still continue to this day. But at the time, her powers were given to her.
Right. It's not something that every Tamaranian has. It's the Scions did that to her.
Right. These 2 pages are great because almost every character has something to say outside of Black Lightning and Katana. Everybody gets their moment in the sun, which is really great. And Dr. Light is the first to bring information to the characters from the Monitor, or at least shedding light, no pun intended, on the situation. Telling them, just as Red Tornado found out last issue, that this goes beyond just your Earth. This is universal, multiversal. Hundreds of universes have been destroyed, as she said. So we're starting to expand this story. The heroes are starting to gain knowledge that it's bigger than they even think, which I like. And then the last thing I have here is the speech that Superman gives. When you kind of counter that with Supergirl at the beginning of this issue, and how Dr. Light has confirmed his worst fears, that this world is over, but that he's going to soldier on. There's some interesting dialogue there. So many of us, and with and without superpowers, have worked for so long and so hard to make the Earth a good place to live. Now this happens. What can I do to save our world? Tell me, and I'll sacrifice my own life if need be. Oh, little foreshadowing there.
Right. Little false foreshadowing, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A little red and blue herring for us.
But is it, though? Because technically...
Well, he comes close to sacrificing his own life, but then Kara takes that burden away from him.
Well, I was going to say, on a metatextual level, the Earth 1 Superman does sacrifice his life so that the burned Superman could live on forever and ever, So, in a metatextual context.
Yeah, you're right. Point definitely taken.
Yeah. I think that's all I had for those pages.
Much less significant on the bottom of page 15 when Dr. Light is saying, well, there is no time to explain. The trade edition adds a comma after the word well. So whichever nitpicker out there saw fit to add that, I salute you, sir or madam.
Oh, she does call it a vibrational fork, right? She does call the thing a vibrational fork. Is that the first time we're hearing that language? I don't remember.
I don't think anyone else well, the Monitor just calls them towers.
Yeah.
I'd leave it to a scientist and supreme pragmatist like Dr. Hoshi to just call a spade or to call a fork. And just call it what she sees it. Just to describe it as a tuning fork, because that's really what they're meant to evoke.
And it's if you know your multiverse language, vibrational. I mean that if it hasn't been used up to now, it should start to get your wheels turning. Vibrations. Okay, we got it.
Helps to have a background in music, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
And then page 16. Yeah, it's nice that they did acknowledge the fact that Katana is present and can speak Japanese on page 16.
Oh, right, yeah. So they do. Black Lightning and Katana also get their little words. Yeah, that's good. Marv Wolfman knows how to write a book sometimes.
He has his off days, too. And then by the bottom of page 16, even as Superman's in the middle of delivering that little speech of self-sacrifice, we suddenly, in that last little skinny panel at the bottom of the page, we were segueing to Paradise Island. So speaking of sacrifices, suddenly we're juxtaposing that with Wonder Woman's home. Wonder Woman is indeed present there, mourning the passing of the reality they know with the rest of her Amazon sisters, including her mother, the pre-crisis Hippolyta, still has blonde hair. They're all just kind of hanging out in the Temple of Athena there on Paradise Island. They're just praying and incanting and awaiting the end. One of the things that the priestess tells them is that quote, the gods cannot save us or themselves, it seems. Thus we chant our prayers. So, the role of the Olympians in this conflict is somewhat ambiguous. Is Mount Olympus going to be affected by this in any way? Can the Olympians survive if there are no positive matter human beings left to worship them? Or is there a different set of Olympians for each parallel Earth? It's all a little bit vague. But they just seem to be keeping out of it as much as possible. I think later on, as part of the Monitor tapes, I think it was, we do get some scenes of shadow demons infesting Olympus. I think they ultimately decide to classify Olympus as another dimension, which doesn't really... Which means they're safe from the antimatter wall, since they're not part of the main sequence of the positive matter multiverse, but it doesn't mean the Anti-Monitor isn't going to take some shots at them anyway. So the takeaway here is that the gods have told the Amazons of Earth-1 that they're pretty much on their own. And so they're the rest of the Amazons seem willing to accept that, but Wonder Woman is restless. She tried urging the other Amazons to join the fight, but they don't want to go along with her. And she does mention in passing a feud between Hippolyta and herself, which is a tie to stuff that was going on in pre-crisis Wonder Woman continuity, I assume. And I do look to you for that, Peter, because I know you've got a complete run and I know you love it. So.
Yeah, I love this sequence. It's 5 panels, and yet I've always remembered this sequence. And reading it now, I have other thoughts too. So on a larger scale, we've had the appearance by John Constantine. We've had the Earth 2 Shining Knight Vandal Savage sequence, and now we had this one. This one, again, kind of feels like it's along those lines of, hey, readers, go read this other title.
Sending out connective tissue to what's going on elsewhere in the DC universe.
Yeah, and this one feels like it's in the middle of those 2 other appearances. Like the Swamp Thing Constantine one is blatant without having a footnote of saying, hey, go read this. The Earth 2 Camelot one, even though there is a Shining Knight story going on in All-Star Squadron, it doesn't feel as sort of invasive. But this one clearly is referencing what's going on in Wonder Woman. So apparently it has something to do with Diana finding out that Hippolyta, and I think you talked about this in one of the Monitoring the Monitor episodes, finding out that Hippolyta messed with her mind a little bit in terms of stuff that was going on with Steve Trevor. Mm. And I think it was kind of based on that, her discovering that information and then that causing a feud.
That rings true. Yeah. I did read one pre-crisis Wonder Woman. This is just completely random. It just came to the top of my to-be-read pile. It was the first appearance of the new Atomic Knight. Mm. You know, talking again, as we were in the last episode, about who's who and how occasionally new information was leaked there. But I think the Atomic Knight's new armor actually showed up in Who's Who before he wore it in the comics. But in the letter column, some reference was made to the Greek god Eros impersonating Steve Trevor and letting that slip in a conversation with Diana at some point, and that might have been what triggered this whole series of revelations about what Hippolyta did.
Yeah. I'm not as those comics don't stick in my brain too much. So outside of that one appearance and that one mention, it may be something else. It might also be that the Crisis is giving it a little more weight, and that the writers will then play it out in later issues. But I don't necessarily remember.
It seems like, since we said that Dan Mishkin gave, he was writing Wonder Woman at that time. So if he gave Wolfman just a big ream of notes about what he wants done with Amethyst, he probably would have given him a pretty sizable chunk of notes about what's going on with Wonder Woman, too.
Yeah. And also just the fact that Diana's not mentioned, the name. Wonder Woman is not mentioned. I mean, you just got to know that this is Paradise. Well, it says Paradise Island and Hippolyta, but that's it. You know,
that is a good point.
She has no tiara on her head. You know, you just have to know that that's Wonder Woman. Now, those first balloons, word balloons. So as you read them, you read it as though it was coming from the statue, right? Like that it's meant to be coming from a god. Or
I want to say it's probably a letterer error.
Right, yeah, that's what I had in my notes too, because what they're saying, you know, they said the gods cannot save us or themselves, thus we chant our prayers, for we who forsook the world of man may die alongside that world we left. So
holding up the hardcover edition, they did correct it so that the tail of the word balloon
Look how long it is.
It goes all the way down to that little hooded figure at the foot of the statues.
Right. So that's good. I'm glad glad you brought that in. So
I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. And just for the simple fact, the other reason why I like this is because, you know, it's Perez drawing Paradise Island, drawing the Amazons. The energy is sort of teeming with what he will eventually do with that book, you know, post-crisis. And I just like that that he's able to I don't know. There's just something about the sequence that just, because I know what's coming afterwards, just makes it that much more potent. So. And we haven't seen Wonder Woman to this point. You know, it's the whole thing that we said about Superman, Batman coming late into the game, the Earth 1 versions. And now we get the Earth 2 Wonder Woman coming in late in the game. And
yep. Well, she isn't even really here. This isn't Wonder Woman, after all. It's just Princess Diana.
Princess Diana, right.
I do like the catch you made there, though, that she's not referred to by name at all.
Yeah.
So it does presume a good deal of familiarity with DC lore on the part of the reader to just know that that's who that is.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I had for that sequence.
Okay. So then that really only takes up half of a page. On the bottom of page 17, all right, a confrontation that is probably millennia in the making takes place. The Monitor's satellite, the Monitor is steadily weakening. He senses he doesn't have much time left, as still more positive matter universes fall to his enemy. So finally he decides, he's about to... Okay, so he's saying to himself that he, Harbinger, the Luthor Child, and Pariah are all that stand between, and then Pariah appears in person. Seems surprised that the Monitor knows who he is. The Monitor reveals that he has known Pariah for a very long time, and then the Monitor goes into one of his expository monologues, with occasional interruptions by Pariah. Understandably a little upset by everything that the Monitor is revealing to him. So he reveals that he's responsible for Pariah's long suffering, this supernatural curse he seems to bear that prevents him that makes him functionally immortal, and that also draws him to the site of the destruction of each successively liquefied eliminated positive matter universe, witnessing megadeath after megadeath, and all to some greater good, as the Monitor tries to impress upon Pariah, but Pariah understandably not much wanting to hear it. And the Monitor just kind of allows the conversation to wander on as he explains to Pariah what's going on, the bigger picture of what's happening and what will happen if the Monitor's chosen champions and his towers do not prevail. Probably telling the Pariah this to put his own suffering in perspective, after all. Show that the Pariah has not suffered so much compared to what might conceivably befall all of creation, and also to bring across to Pariah that he hasn't suffered in vain. But again, Pariah still doesn't quite grasp all that's being told to him, and who can blame him? It's pretty heady cosmic stuff. And by the end of the issue, the Monitor doesn't even really get a chance to finish telling the Pariah what he's trying to tell him. So I guess we'll just begin with the opening of Monitor's speech when he drops the big bomb on Pariah.
Okay. All right. So what are you thinking about this sequence up to?
Well, I think the first... Okay, well, the first note is Pariah pops in, but, where did he dump Lady Quark in the meantime?
I know.
Teleports out with her, and then next thing you know, he's keeping an appointment aboard the Monitor's satellite, and she's just floating on a rock someplace. Where could he have taken her that would be safe? What other universe could he drop her? Every universe he goes to is doomed, so where would he leave her that she'd be safe? He's
like the Earth 1 pre-crisis Superman. He has a pouch in his cape. That Superman keeps his costume in.
She's going to be good and pissed off by the time she gets out of there.
I have no idea. I wrote the same damn thing. I'm like, come on. What's that about? Where the hell is she? And we don't ever find out. I mean, the next time we see her, but she's just like, oh, it's me. I'm back.
I'm here and I'm angry.
Yeah, this, the Monitor saying, all is not yet ready. And I know that he knows that he needs to die for the rest of his plan to happen. But, I did at some point, I was like, well, what are you waiting for? Like, come on. But he says it, all the chess pieces aren't quite where they need to be just yet. And for him to have the ultimate sacrifice. And but it did make me question, I know we're not quite there yet, but if he knows that his death is imminent, is there a need? Like, could he have provoked her earlier? What did he need? Like, is it because he had to wait until Dr. Light was created? This other tower had to be brought into present-day Earth 1 New York. Was he waiting for Pariah to show up? Why couldn't he just... The towers were there. Why couldn't he have just had her kill him when we got to, like, the cliffhanger of issue 3? So what do you think? Is that even a point to ponder?
I'm sure there were other things that he needed to shuffle around besides just setting up the towers.
Maybe just waiting for Alexander Luthor to get older,
to grow up.
Something.
Yeah. It's another unanswered question. If he had more time, what else would the Monitor have done? Would he have created still more new characters to help things along? What would everything being ready have looked like? I guess.
Yeah. I like that we get a little bit of a timeline thing here on page 18 where he says the satellite was constructed just prior to the day you were cursed. Because Pariah says, where are we? And he goes, you're aboard my home, constructed quite a long time ago, just prior to the day you were cursed. So that gives a little bit of a timeline of how long because Pariah, this has been going on for, what are we told? Like
a very long time. I just said potentially millennia.
Yeah.
Because I know he accidentally destroyed his own universe a long time ago, and I think he was like in stasis of sorts for a while after that, and then was woken up from that around the time the Anti-Monitor started killing off universes. Yeah, we'll get that in the big debriefing that Harbinger gives representatives of all the different universes later on. Kind of a brief history of Crisis.
So that panel there on page 18 where Monitor says, I was the one responsible for your survival. You should have died. I saw a greater good coming from your sins. Pariah says, you're the one who did this to me. You made me suffer the pains of untold millions. But there's more to that, right? Not only did he help him survive, but he's the one who also set him on the path, right? We find this out later, right?
Yep, and the Monitor says right here, I sacrificed much of my own life to see that you lived. So he had to sacrifice a certain portion of his own immortal life energy to impart that immortality to Pariah, and also, as you say, to set him, to set up this trajectory he's been on for years. Not only to give him immortal life, but also to sort of program the cosmic energy within him so that it would automatically shunt him to the site of each new dying universe.
Yeah, and that doesn't come out until 7, I think, right, or some other issue.
Yeah, that's what I was. When Pariah gathers together one person from each surviving Earth, Lady Quark's allowed to attend, and she tells the origin of the Monitor and Anti-Monitor, going back to the dawn of time and before, all the way up to the present, and that's when we finally get the full story of Pariah's involvement in all this.
Yeah.
I think Pariah himself learned about some of it for the first time then.
Right, and so I think it's interesting that Monitor even still doesn't. He has all this information, yet hasn't really. It doesn't all come out. Whether that's a character choice or a writer's choice, because maybe it's not necessarily. Yeah,
sometimes the two formed. Get uncomfortably intertwined.
Yeah.
Yes, it's when you start screaming at the comic or the TV screen or whatever, because it's so frustrating that the character would realistically do or say certain things at a certain time, but for authors' convenience, they withhold their hand.
Yeah. And what about that? Pariah says, "Grateful, you're insane. I should kill you for what you've done." Like let's talk about from last episode about the emotional spectrum that Pariah has is not very wide, and yet here he's like
anger. We finally see some anger coming from him.
Yeah.
After all these millennia, he regrows his spine. And the next caption is my favorite from this exchange. And you're sick. Watching all those people futilely fighting for their very survival. And who else is watching all those people? We are. See, I made a little mention of that in the last episode. It's this little mini theme of watching, of monitoring, of spectation. So it's something that would have been called scopophilia. I think it's that was coined by in grad school at Bowling Green. We had to read a few essays by an influential feminist film theorist named Laura Mulvey. And one of her favorite terms was scopophilia, which is a pleasure derived from the act of beholding, not so much from what you're seeing, but just from the power that's imparted to you by being detached from the spectacle and being able to watch it, and just sort of penetrating the objects of your gaze with said gaze. So there's some of that imputed to the reader here. We're kind of complicit with the Monitor, in metatextually speaking, in that this whole spectacle this whole crisis thing is contrived for our benefit, for our entertainment.
Right.
Not only this, but every other superhero-related spectacle, for that matter. Everything that the characters in these comics suffer is for our entertainment. So that gets us into like Grant Morrison, Coyote Gospel territory too.
Yeah.
So, and Morrison, of course, Wolfman, of course, just kind of scrapes the surface here with that. But we're kind of implicitly lumped in with the Monitor because we're watching everything that he watches.
Yeah.
And we have even less reason to do so. He's doing it because he wants to save what are to him real lives. We're just watching it for our own entertainment.
Think about how much influence people suggest that Alan Moore has on the DC universe because so many things are mined from his work. Morrison certainly has. Jeff Johns certainly has. Sometimes people even think of it in critical terms where they say, Blackest Night came out of one sentence of an Alan Moore story. Whereas I sort of look at that and go, that to me is, I think that's interesting. I think that's a positive thing that you can glean from one story, this larger story. I mean, that just speaks to the power of
tiny acorns, mighty oaks may grow.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Alan Moore himself has nothing but contempt for that. They're still mining the corpses of 30-year-old stories of his.
Yeah. But I mean, his well, we won't get into Alan Moore's craziness. But what my point is, though, look how much Marv Wolfman has. Like what you just said, that Marv Wolfman didn't develop it to a certain degree, but he didn't have to, because that's for later writers to do. Like later writers have looked at this and managed to mine so much from this story, from sometimes just, little passages or the way this story puts certain characters into a new status quo. Psycho Pirate, of course, Alexander Luthor, Superboy Prime, Superman of Earth 2, Lois Lane of Earth 2, those characters. So it's interesting that I don't know if I really hear that. We always relate it back to the Crisis, and we say how influential Crisis is, but I'm not sure if we use the language of look how influential Marv Wolfman has been. Maybe because this book was, it had I don't mean this in a negative way, but there was a committee, there was a group of minds that were working on it, but ultimately it was a Marv Wolfman, George Perez and company creation. So, I don't know, it kind of just makes me think Marv Wolfman needs to get a little bit, and he does, but he needs to get a little bit more of that kind of, look how much people mine from him. Look how much people mine from Grant Morrison, Like, we're living it now with DC Metal, but...
Well, yeah, and Wolfman, too.
And Wolfman, right. But the language always seems to suggest Crisis, right? We don't ever say, like, Wolf, like... Or not, I'm being general, but you know what I'm...
Yeah, it's like Crisis has become an entity of its own, and they forget that Wolfman was the architect of much of it. Not without help, of course, but
of course, yeah. So, that's just a tangential thought.
No, it's a worthy one.
The machines are important. The vibrational forks, think of the Flash manipulating his vibrations to travel to alternate Earths. Mm-hmm. The forks have to work the same way, matching frequencies so that the Earths can come together without merging, just resonating enough, as that one panel said, or narration said, seconds apart. Not only the Earth, but the Earth's entire universe, the whole universe. So we're sort of centralized on thinking about the Earth, but
ethnocentric little buggers that we are. We forget that there's so many other civilizations affected by this. There's, talking about your untold tales of the Crisis. I mean, what was Thanagar's experience of all this? What's the Earth 4 version of Thanagar like, for example?
And we sort of touch on that in the Monitor tapes in issue 8, or is it, right? The ones that run down on the bottom. Is it 8 or 10 or 9? I forget what issue that is.
I want to... boy. Okay. I'm turning pages in my trade.
Yeah. It's when we kind of glimpse the...
number 10.
Number 10.
Death at the Dawn of Time.
Prince Gavin, Starman. I think the Thanagarians are referenced in that little sequence there and stuff like that. But it's our Thanagarians. It's Earth 1 Thanagarians, but... to your point, yeah. You could do a series called Untold Tales of the Crisis, and it could run forever.
Easily. Yeah. I mean, I'd sort of envision something like that as like a quarterly anthology. Mm. But, yeah, something tells me DC Now wouldn't be interested in that.
That's really all I had for those pages, if we want to go to this awesome double-page spread.
Oh, one more little thing at the bottom of page 18 when Pariah asks Monitor what those towers are, and Monitor says, with prayer, the salvation of all life. And I just wondered, to whom does the Monitor pray exactly? Does he have a belief system? And especially if you graft on what Grant Morrison came up with during Final Crisis about the origins of the Monitor and his race, coming from some kind of higher... uber reality.
Right.
Like all of the DC universe is just a little bacterial growth within the greater essence of Monitor.
But this Monitor is a little more humanoid in his origins. So.
Yeah, Morrison really takes the Monitor concept well beyond the bounds of anything Wolfman had in mind when he created the character.
Right.
But still, it's interesting to think what his concept of God would be.
So wait, before we get to the 2 pages, we really should address the ads. Previously, right there.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a big one since it is a Crisis House ad right there on the page facing story page 18.
Yeah. 50 years in the making, the most talked about comics event ever. And it's showing issue number 4, which is the one we're doing right now. Sergeant Rock, Jonah Hex, Batman and the Outsiders, the Legion of Superheroes, the Teen Titans. Not the new Teen Titans, the Teen Titans.
Well, they just wanted to save room on that row.
Yeah. Commandy, Arion, Firebrand, the Losers, Green Lantern, Obsidian, Superman, Batlash, Flash, Firestorm, and many, many more. Worlds will live, worlds will die, and the DC Universe will never be the same.
That immortal tagline.
Yeah, so the 4th Crisis ad now that we've gotten. 3 of them prior, and this one during. I don't know if we've gotten any others during, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
That's true. They might not. There might be others that were running in other books, and it really does make more sense to run Crisis ads in comics that aren't Crisis.
Right.
Because if you're reading Crisis, they've kind of already got you.
Kind of also interesting that it's on top of an ad for 2 books that will not survive the DC purge of what they're trying to do with Crisis. The war book Sergeant Rock and the other war book GI Combat.
Yeah, that was a notion that one of our listeners had brought up, whether or not Crisis actually contributed to or hastened the demise of other off-genre, non-superhero comics at DC.
Yeah. Did you give a breakdown of these 2 pages yet?
No, I didn't. I just kind of hinted at what was. Well, yeah, very generally, I glossed it over. I said that the Monitor segued as much to change the subject from Pariah's sufferings as anything else. He swings the topic into what's going on throughout the multiverse and what the Monitor is trying to do to stop it. So he's explaining to Pariah how things stand and where the greatest threat will now lie. Earth 1 and Earth 2, namely, as they are now being affected by. Is this the first time the antimatter wall has been seen on Earth 2? Because we do see some present-day Earth 2 characters, like members of Infinity Inc., Jade and Northwind, plus Alan Scott and Ted Knight as Starman.
Yeah, I mean, the only other Earth 2 sequence was Camelot or when Harbinger picked up Firebrand.
Right, when she was at that bake sale or something, a charity event. Yeah, I think this might be the first time we've seen the White Wall move across modern-day Earth 2.
Yeah.
It's just one little panel there at the top of page 20. But yeah, so Monitor's explaining this, and Pariah is reacting with horror, which is he's kind of perfected that by now. Right. Yes, these worlds will die, Monitor, like all those I've been forced to watch die. Did you do that to me? What purpose did you have to make me suffer like that? So he's demanding some specific answers. Pariah is at the far side of this awesome 2-page spread.
Yeah.
And as we turn the page, we'll find that he doesn't really get them. But let's focus on this page first.
Yeah, these are great pages. This, I wrote in my notes. We don't. It's not that we necessarily learn anything really new on these pages. Most of the stuff has been touched on. But what it is it's a great showcase for Perez to let the art tell the story. To escalate the disaster story that's going on in all these places. So it's not only that the White Wall is coming, but nature is going bonkers. So like in Wild Wild West, the volcano explosion, the seas of Atlantis are whipping about, so that all the Little Mermaids and Dolphin and Lori Lamaris are getting blown about.
I think the one in the middle is called Ronal.
Ronal, yeah.
Yeah.
The rainstorms, the buildings are collapsing, devices are exploding. We'll get specific about these characters soon, but just the disaster story aspect that is part of this is really nicely played out. And then you get that middle panel running down in where the staples are, or the crease of all those universes in destruction, just like Crisis number 1, the cover to Crisis number 1 that shows all the Earths being destroyed. It's good. It's a great way to showcase the DC universe without having to spend pages and pages and pages. Just let Perez do what he does and go through all the various DC locations on Earth 1 and Earth 2. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And I'm sure we'll get more specific in a moment there. You digging into your thesis over there?
Well, yeah, you mentioned disaster movies. I did. I know somewhere in here I mentioned something about the similarity to disaster movies being kind of an attempt to root it in the zeitgeist of the times. Just contextualize it as an 80s apocalypse. the Irwin Allen movies were fairly recent back then. But, yeah. It's probably no more than a sentence or two.
Yeah. And certainly in DC Comics, I mean, we really haven't, well, I shouldn't say we haven't seen anything to this level, but this kind of goes beyond. But the joy of these pages are also in the specifics, and some of these scenes are scenes that we've already encountered with the towers, such as the Wild Wild West one. Those are all characters that we've seen: Firebrand, Cyborg, Scalp Hunter, Batlash, maybe Johnny Thunder. So the Atlantis ones, which, you know what, Adam, I think for the first time I've ever read this, I'm looking at it right now. This is the first time I've seen Atlantis, the dome of Atlantis, in the background. You see that? It's colored the same as the water in blue.
Yeah, I can see little rooftops behind it.
Yeah, and one of them looks like it's on a slant, like it's being destroyed or something.
Yeah, like it's falling over.
That's the first time I've ever seen that detail. Ever. That's insane. I've read this book how many times? Jesus.
I'm going to say, well, that's why we keep rereading it. There's just so much to find.
Yeah.
Let me see if it's colored any differently. It's blends in pretty much just as well in the hardcover edition.
God, that's crazy. So those characters are the first time we're seeing them, right? Laurie Lamaris, Ronald, and Dolphin, the first time we've seen them.
Pretty sure. Yeah. Outside, I guess that would be the city-state of Tritonus behind them, since at some point it was established. Since we've seen a couple of different versions of Atlantis in DC Comics.
But go ahead.
Mermaids belong to Tritonus, and Aquaman belongs to Poseidonus.
Right. And if you look, I'm pretty sure Who's Who 1 was already out, and the design of that... I don't remember if it was Perez or not, but that building right there on the far extreme left corner looks like it has like stairs in the front. If you look at the Atlantis design, that's exactly what you said. It's how do you pronounce it? Tritonus?
Yeah. Of Triton, like the son of Poseidon.
Yeah. Because in the center of the design is like this temple thing. It's like a temple and it's colored blue, whereas the other building is the other dome or whatever is more yellowish in nature. I'm going to quick look it up while we're talking here. I know we have the Who's Who bound edition is over there on the shelf.
Staring you in the face.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and so I'm just going down and I'll quick look it up.
Okay, so then we're kind of alternating panels between familiar scenes and novel ones. So the next one down after Tritonus and the Mer people is Earth 2 Superman and Dawnstar fighting off the giant shadow demon in the Great Disaster future era. Then there's a scene of a few random DC heroes rescuing people from natural disasters, nature gone nuts. Blue Devil in the foreground. Oh, there it is, a kind of ziggurat-style temple with the staircase in the front. Yeah, I see what you mean. And who provided the artwork for that?
That was Marshall Rogers.
Marshall Rogers, okay. Not who I would have guessed. So, yes, Blue Devil, who was a fairly prominent figure in DC Comics at the time. They're speaking of ads inside the front cover. There's the ad where DC is giving thanks to the Amazing Heroes magazine, which ranked the top 10 best books of 1984. DC has 4 of them locked up, and one of them, number 7, was Blue Devil. So there he is.
Fan favorite.
Yeah, in the foreground of that panel, and there'll be more from Mr. Cassidy in the future. Then Zatanna's in the background. Blue Devil and Zatanna actually had a little bit of a flirtation there for a while there in the pages of Blue Devil's own solo series. She's back there using her magic to protect some people. And above them in the air are the Earth 1 Hawks, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, the Thanagarian Hawks, and also Hal Jordan II, Airwave, in his blue and gray, is a gray and gold costume, which was the ICG Crisis Index claims this is the first appearance of that costume, actually.
Oh.
Because, again, Who's Who number 1 had come out by now, so that might have actually debuted that costume there, because I'm pretty sure it's the same one he's shown wearing in his entry.
And that was one of the stated things. They said even costume things might be new for the Crisis. So the Crisis could be used to showcase a new design.
This one very subtly. And the bottom panel is Geoforce and Dr. Polaris going up against another giant shadow demon in Markovia. Then in between these two columns of panels, we've got this neat little gutter decoration, just a chain of different Earths with kind of like a bead garland from hell. It's just like a strand of antimatter that seems to be going through all of them, just kind of winding from side to side, destroying them. It's decorative, but that again brings to mind that Warhol-esque aspect I see in some of these repeated images of gridded panels and multiple destroyed Earths. It also kind of this chain of Earths that appears inside the cover logo. Mm-hmm. It says again, it's kind of that repetition of images brings Warhol to mind, to me at least. And then on the second column, we've got that Earth 2 panel we were talking about. With those Infinity Inc. and JSA members. Then we have a shadow demon destroying the turrets of ancient Atlantis. Then we have a scene from the Stone Age, some caveman character or other, possibly Anthro, possibly Kong, possibly Tor. There's a few possibilities. Then we come back to 1985, where we have Starfire and Metamorpho and Halo fighting another giant shadow demon. And then we jump to the 30th century, where some Legionnaires, looks like Starboy, Dreamgirl, Shrinking Violet, Ultra Boy, and Brainiac 5, enduring a big explosion.
Yeah, that's a good point about that caveman one, the Neanderthal, ancient times, whatever. I just always used to assume Anthro, but he's a little bulkier.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
You can't really see what color his hair is, but I'm assuming it's darker just because of the heavy ink that's on it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It could just be a generic Neanderthal we've never seen before, too. Important thing is he's trying to bring across to us that this is happening simultaneously across all periods of time in the DC continuum.
So, unless I missed it, Pariah knows to call Monitor. Those worlds will all die, Monitor. But Monitor has not introduced himself prior to that.
Well, maybe this is one of those bits of information that Pariah... my retcon explanation last episode about how Pariah knows certain things about Earths that he appears on.
I love it.
All part of the curse. It's a smart curse that Pariah's put on him, apparently. It adapts as needed.
Yeah, and the forks, the tuning forks on one side to the other, they are the same image, but just reversed. So it's not like Perez drew the fork again. You can, if you actually look at it mirror to mirror, they are exact opposites.
Well, I'm glad he did himself that favor anyway.
Saved himself. All right. That's all I have for that.
Okay, so then we can move on. So Pariah's asking on the last utterance on page 20, Monitor, what purpose did you have to make me suffer like that? You aren't changing the future. You can't alter the past. So what have you done? And Monitor, somewhat evasively, just says, the best I am able. For you do not realize how much weaker I become with every passing moment. All my strength is being conserved for the end. And the end, as Monitor is vaguely aware. I don't think he knows the precise moment of his death. He just knows it's coming. And he remarks that his adversary is able to move much quicker than he can because, well, the Anti-Monitor is evil and ruthless and therefore doesn't have the same restraint that morality brings with it. He extracts a promise from Pariah, somewhat cryptic, because... For all I'm talking about, his injecting information directly into Pariah's brain as needed to, the better to fully understand the scope of the suffering he's witnessing. He says, do not harm her until all is made clear. Pariah doesn't know who her is. And Monitor just goes on muttering about how all is not ready. And then in bursts Harbinger, too late, old fool. So that finally brings us back around to where I thought we were at the end of issue 3. But we do see an image of Harbinger standing there threatening an image of Monitor. And she calls him an old fool then, too, come to think of it.
Maybe it's a little, it's a cliffhanger, but it's a forward cliffhanger of some kind or something.
A flash forward?
Flash forward, yeah, there you go.
Okay, so she bursts in, and Monitor doesn't... He pulls his little wise Obi-Wan Kenobi thing, where he's like, I've been waiting for you, Lila. Do what you must. So that I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And the internal conflict rages on. I mean, her eyes are still black, so she's got that little shadow demon still hiding in her brain. And she really does not want to kill him. She loves him, and it takes all the willpower she can muster to nearly tell him how much she loves him. But then in the end, the anti-Monitor wins out, and she blasts Monitor. And then, neat transition there. The next thing we see, the next thing we see is not Harbinger falling off. We don't see her actually falling off the viewing platform on which they were standing. We see her several yards down, like already into her free. She goes straight from shooting the Monitor to being back in her Lila form, not Harbinger anymore, unconscious, just plunging. So I kind of like the jump that transition requires of the reader.
Wait, so you... I mean,
this is from the bottom of 21 to the first long vertical panel on 22.
I mean, she's still designed in the Harbinger costume when she's falling there. You can see her boots and her...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of thought that was her gown returning to her, but you're right. It would be more like around her ankles if that were so.
But what does happen there, I'm glad you pointed out that transition because the cover really exists between page 21 and 22. Like, you can go to the panel where Monitor is, that big panel where it says death. Then you could take a moment, go to the cover, and then all of a sudden, maybe Harbinger, then something reacts and then she falls down. Like the cover sort of exists between those two moments, which I think is kind of cool.
Yes, I agree too. It's one thing when a cover reproduces a scene that happens in a comic. It's another when it gives you a cut frame from between two images. So it's like that's page number 21 and a half out there on the outside of the comic. Cool.
I love that he refers to her as Lila. He's trying to get to the human part of her, like not calling her Harbinger, but he says Lila.
A last word of a father to a daughter, you might say.
Yeah. And let's see if I had anything else. Oh, I just wrote this note, but I don't, this was just something I wrote. Monitor is getting weaker because only 5 universes are left. Of course, not counting Earth D. If a Monitor is tied to her respective universe, as shown later after the events of Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, then of course this Prime Monitor would be at his weakest point, because he's not necessarily tied to one. He's more about. Really, this Monitor was the torchbearer of every multiverse. And every Earth and he took it upon himself to be in charge of everything. So that's really like an undeveloped hindsight kind of thought that I just wrote down as I was reading it. So this panel where she takes the tumble, this page.
Yep, and again, even conceding to you that she is still Harbinger, she falls, just transitioning directly from that, skipping over the image on the cover, directly to her, quite a few yards down in her plummet. And Pariah is just as confused as the reader at that point. He said, What? Did I miss something? What happened? She's gone? And then he's just kind of sitting there pathetically gabbling to the dead body of the Monitor. Please explain it to me. What do I do? How do I work these machines? And so Pariah is left feeling like the reader, way over his head. He doesn't know what the hell to do, and so there is nothing, and the man called Pariah can only cry. Remember, I quoted that sentence directly in my thesis, and describing Pariah and the sense of helplessness that defines him for much of his presence in this story.
Yeah,
nothing for him to do but watch.
Watch, be dramatic. I said that's why he has purple hair, because he loves purple prose.
I sympathize with that purple here because the one time I cosplayed as Pariah, I had to spray it that way, and I still have the comb I used at that. And it still bears a little bit of the so yes.
By the way, your point about her, those two long panels, great vertical panels, great design by Perez there. The second one where the brilliant light flashes, and we're to assume she changes back to Lila at the end of that, and
poor Pariah's left isolated way up there at the top.
Yeah,
of that long shaft-shaped panel.
And you also have to assume, again, this is hindsight, that whatever it was that whatever demon was inside Lila has been expunged from this, because when the next we see her, she doesn't have that taint in her anymore. So she did what she was possessed to do by the Anti-Monitor, even though the Monitor knew it was going to happen. She's played her role. The Anti-Monitor thinks, great, we're good. That's all I need of you. Well, we just take it to the end.
All right, since it's really just imagery from here on out, sparing a couple of panels, a couple of captions. So yeah, then on page 23, we've got images of I like the diagonal construction here. It just kind of evokes the downhill slide of two universes into oblivion here, as with this suffering visage of Pariah slowly fading to white along with everything else. So we get shots of Obsidian and Arion in Atlantis, Killer Frost and Sir Justin back in in the days of Camelot, next to a caption that reads Earth 1, which is peculiar because that's
wrong.
Yeah, that's happening on Earth 2, that is. Then the Old West heroes plus Firebrand and Jon Stewart. Then next to the caption of Earth 2, the World War II era team with Geoforce, which again, wrong. We've established that's Earth 1. And then definitely Earth 1. Below that, the new Dr. Light is shown in the foreground, looking kind of disturbed, along with Donna Troy and Starfire, Changeling as a bird in the background there, Superman of Earth 1, Halo, and at the bottom, Earth 2 Superman and Dawnstar and Kamandi in the Great Disaster period, which, again, is presumed to be the future of Earth 1.
So it's all the 5 locations plus the new location of New York. So it's all the places where the vibrational forks are located.
Right.
Yeah.
For these worlds, these universes, Earth 1, Earth 2 must now die. Oh, yeah, and something that I'd meant to bring up a couple of pages ago, may as well now. On page 19, when the Monitor is speaking, he said, Earth 1 and Earth 2 are set to perish next, their fates inextricably linked together. And that makes meta sense to us as readers because they were the first two to be introduced.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I wonder what the in-story reason would be for them to be inextricably linked. I mean, do all consecutive integer Earths have that kind of link? Is there a link between the Crime Syndicate Earth and the Charlton Earth, since they're 3 and 4?
And there really is. I mean, there's hardly any between 2 and 3. So
yeah.
What would an in story be? Is it just because they're the closest related ones? Like as you.
Maybe the ones that have been jumped between most often. Maybe the barriers between them have been broken down so far.
Yeah. Or connected because of the cosmic treadmill, because of
the Spectre.
Yeah, the Spectre, there's more of a link between those two, positive and negative. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and what's the, the whole thing, like 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4, 4 + like the whole incremental, it gets bigger as you go bigger, is the same true the opposite way. Like the connections between the Earths are weaker as you go away from the prime Earth.
I think
1 to 2.
The Earths in general are just weaker.
Yeah.
Having to start with the higher numbers because they're the furthest from the core of it, furthest out on the outliers, furthest from the Big Bang, as it were, the epicenter. And
then we just keep going.
Yep, and there's that image on. I love that one on the next page 24. Just a big long stream or queue of different planets, just streaming away into a white vanishing point, and then that image just fading away into white. And then that 9-panel grid, as we've said before, in the 80s storytelling is evocative of a certain claustrophobic paranoia that's in keeping with the spirit of those times. Then on page 25, it's that 9-panel grid with the first one is just blank, pure white, and then slowly and deliberately that blackness creeps in. Again, I've said this as far back as issue 1, but it moves like a thing alive. It's a malefic presence, manipulated by a sinister intelligence, and we know whose intelligence that is, of course. So first the whiteness of non-being, and then the blackness. If in comics blank page white equals non-being, then black must equal being, presence, intent. And it creeps in, and we go from the whiteness of non-being to the blackness of the presence of evil, I guess. And that's and the caption, "To be continued?" ? Cliffhanger of cliffhangers.
Yeah, and truly, this really is the end of Earth 1 and Earth 2. I mean, I know we still are on Earth 1 and Earth 2 as we continue forward, but
they're still around, but they're not where they used to be, and they never will be again.
No, and the heroes, nobody exists on those Earths in the way that they do prior to this issue, because they have that weird time zone between the that weird nexus where the Earths touch. That
like the shadow zone between them.
Yeah, and then eventually time gets all kind of crazy. So this is it. This is if you have to say where's the end of Earth 1? Where's the true delineation between pre-crisis, post-crisis in a organized sense? This would be the issue. I mean, in terms of the untouched Earth. I mean, and hence we get this last panel saying to that, here we are, readers, you're done. That's it. From here on out, it's uncharted territory. So I think it's kind of cool. I wonder, I wonder if this was Marv Wolfman's idea, if it was Perez's idea, if it was both of their ideas to do this last page the way they're doing it, closing off the DC universe as we know it, using crisis visual language that they developed, again, that whole thing of giving Marv Wolfman his due, that's Morrisonian. Which I guess really isn't, it's not Morrisonian. It's everything they did in the Silver Age, right? Where they would put their creators into stories, where creators would, Superman winks at us, that Flash cover that Morrison was inspired by, where Flash is like, don't read this issue.
Don't pass up this issue. My life depends on it.
Yeah, so that conceit has been around for a while, and this one is just taking it to a whole new level, which I love. I love that.
Anything to say about the letter column, since this issue has one?
I do. Do you have stuff?
Just a couple of quickies.
Okay.
A couple of different letter writers inquire of writer-editor Wolfman what the numerical designation of the Charlton Action Heroes Earth would be. Mm-hmm. And Wolfman hadn't quite made up his mind about that yet. He replies, about Blue Beetle, it doesn't make any difference what Earth he and his fellow Charlton heroes were on. It ain't there no more.
Which isn't true.
Yeah, and which leads one to wonder, is he just being evasive because he doesn't want to he wants people to assume that all Earths are dead now and all is lost? Or did he really not figure out yet that there was more action to happen on those other parallel Earths?
And how far back did he write that answer, right? So we're reading that in issue 4, and they're responding to issue 1 or even proofs of issue 1. Like there's another letter writer that is reading a proof. They probably sent out advanced copies. So we're talking months that he's answering this at least 4 months prior to when we're actually reading it, maybe more. So maybe by that time does he know what's happening in the very next issue? The very next issue is where we get the next designation, right? I think.
Is it that soon? I'm not sure they're
bothering
very
the
much.
Next 2.
Yeah, I think I want to say that issue 5 is mostly about the problems between Earths 1 and 2.
Okay.
I don't know that it gets very much into Earths 4, X, and S.
Well, I know they send them to different Earths, so that's why I thought maybe that was in that one. I think it ends with the freedom fighters.
Yeah. I'm looking at that big scene, that big crowd scene, which I'm sure we'll have fun with.
That's going to be an episode unto itself.
It could be. Yeah, but it's all kinds of heroes and villains just from those two Earths, though.
Okay, keep going. Go to the end of the issue. See if we get any involvement.
No.
On
the very last page, we witness what appears to be the death of Earth X.
Okay, so it's one more issue even past that. So issue 6 is when we get the designation.
Yeah. So it's not quite the end of all positive matter yet. There's still a couple of universes that are still in their original spot.
Right.
It's just Earths 1 and 2 that have been flung off into the beyond.
Yeah. There's the third letter says, I'm glad the crisis isn't out to sell toys. The response compares crisis to superpowers. And I said, I wonder if the letter writer was referencing Secret Wars.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. Also, his idea about the 50th anniversary of this story and having another young infant rocketing off is a nice parallel and touch to the legacy. And as Morrison says, these stories are cyclical, universal archetypes. The age of heroes will always happen, and they will always follow the same patterns. And curiously, Marvel is even doing that with Marvel Legacy. Did you get a chance to read the one-shot Marvel Legacy?
I did look through it, yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing of like the Avengers of BC.
1 million it's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a stretch. But that whole conceit of that whole idea of these characters existing in some form or the powers or whatever. Certainly DC is very strong with it in terms of their legacy, but Marvel seems to always do it with their powers more than anything, and like the Star Brand or the Ghost Rider's spirit of whatever.
The powers do seem to matter a little more than the person wielding them.
Yeah.
Not that doesn't matter a little bit too, but
right.
Yeah, that is what's repeated over and over again. Is the physical aspect, the costume design, and and their physical abilities.
And is this the first letter column? This is the first letter column, right?
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention was that Wolfman, at the end of the last letter on the second page there, he says, thanks to the hundreds of others who wrote in, to date we've received no negative mail on issue number 1. And although I'm sure somebody out there didn't like it, we're incredibly gratified to all those who wrote to say they cared.
And we get a little Perez design shot of the Monitor down at the bottom.
Yep.
With a very tiny waist.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a slim waist. Keeps fit.
Must have like an armor-plated girdle underneath that thing.
What else can you do with that big, giant ball of a satellite but just run from place to place?
Tons of crunches. He probably planks. Seems like a plank guy.
Yeah, I mean, but that's it. That's
Next issue. Well, what happens after everything's gone? What was the Monitor's plan? Is he really dead? Who's behind the crisis? And most of all, what in heaven's name happens now? You'll just have to wait until issue number 5.
Yeah. And as you said, these issues are kind of broken up into 4-issue chunks. We did the first 4. The second 4 take us up to the death of Barry Allen, and then the next 4 are after that are the villain war, kicks off with the villain war, and then it wraps up the crisis event by the end. So what I thought was for the next episode, and we teased this at the beginning of the episode, I think this might be a good place in the next episode, maybe the next 2 episodes, to take a look at all the tie-ins up to this point.
We had talked about that.
Yeah, I thought we did. So
just complete one act or stage and then go back and fill in the extra textual stuff.
Right. And we're not talking about the Monitor appearances. We're talking about anything that was crisis-related while these issues were coming out, whether they had a banner or not. But I'm not sure if the banner was out just yet.
I don't think it was.
Yeah, but there were things to talk about. Like, we could go back to that Omega Men issue that was referenced in this and take a look at what really did happen. I think that could be interesting to kind of stop, take status quo of what's going on in the larger DC universe at this point, and see if some of those tie-ins truly are Red Sky tie-ins, or do they? What are the writers playing around with? You know, especially in these early stages, it might really be interesting to see. I don't know how many there are, and like the Monitor issues, I can't imagine we'll discuss the whole issue if it doesn't relate to Crisis. We'll just focus on maybe the parts. That way we can burn through them a little quicker.
That would be wise of us, I think.
Yeah. So what do you think of that? You think we should do that?
Yes.
Spend time on that?
I would have suggested it too, actually.
Great. Good. So then that's what we'll do. You got these 2 episodes, and you know, if Adam and I talk to ourselves in the future, you know, we'll try to figure out where we are. What is it? January 2018 by now? When do we release the second episode? Who knows? So by the time we get to that tie-in one, it may be, for all we know, February. We don't know. We don't know what. We'll try to we'll coordinate our schedules. Because our lives are pretty busy around this time.
Well, I will be seeing you a couple of times in early 2018. We've already established.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So
more plans can be made then.
Good. That's good. That's good. Anything else for the good of the group? Good for the listeners?
I think we've been as good to them as we can afford.
Yeah. And I do have to say, too, a lot of the impulse to try to catch up on this again is just random people. I'm sure you get it, too. Hey, when are you going to do a Crisis Tapes? And you know, it's always about time and life and all this and that. So I'm happy that we were able to do this again.
Oh, me too, Peter. Yeah. It sounds like it was coming at just the right time for both of us.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll end with one final exhortation to our listeners to find their way to the comicforums.vanillaforums.com and engage with us, commune with us in dialogue about this wonderful story we've been talking about and about the things that we've been saying about it. So we value any and all feedback from our listeners. You know, we're all Crisis kids here. This is going to be a fun conversation as always, and we will undoubtedly address whatever points you make there on upcoming episodes. It's gotten to be kind of a tradition for us. So in the meantime, we leave you trembling in suspense, suspended in limbo between Act 1 and Act 2 of Crisis. We'll be back for some fun crossover and tie-in talk on our next episode. Until then, take care.